At 2:13 in the morning, the ocean was completely black. There was no city skyline, no streetlights, no sound of traffic, only the enormous waves hitting the side of a cargo ship somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic. And on the deck stood a 21-year-old man named Ethan Carter. His hands were freezing, his clothes were soaked, and he was holding a rope that weighed almost as much as he did. Ethan wasn't the captain. He wasn't an officer. He wasn't an engineer. He was a deckhand. And on that night, he was about to learn why working at sea was one of the hardest jobs he had ever chosen. Ethan had grown up in a small town in Maine. His father had worked in a local machine shop, and his mother worked at a grocery store. There was never much money in the family. After high school, Ethan had no idea what he wanted to do. College wasn't an option. He needed money. One afternoon, he saw an advertisement for entry-level maritime workers. The salary was much higher than most jobs in his hometown. The catch? He would spend weeks away from home. He would work long hours. And sometimes he would be hundreds of miles from the nearest piece of land. Ethan applied. A few weeks later, he was standing on his first cargo ship. The vessel was enormous, hundreds of feet long, thousands of tons. And Ethan suddenly felt incredibly small. His first job was simple: clean the deck, move equipment, inspect ropes, help with loading operations, follow instructions, and never get in the way. The older sailors didn't make things easy for him. One of them looked at Ethan during his first week and said, "Kid, the ocean doesn't care how strong you think you are." Ethan remembered those words because the ocean proved them true. His first month was miserable. He woke up before sunrise, worked until late at night. His hands developed blisters, his back hurt. He barely slept, and the constant movement of the ship made him seasick. There were moments when he wanted to quit, but something kept him going. He became fascinated by the ship itself. Every day Ethan watched how the crew operated. He learned how cargo was secured, how fuel was managed, how routes were planned, how crews communicated, how expensive even a small mistake could become. One day, while helping with cargo operations, Ethan noticed something. A large amount of time was being wasted waiting for equipment. The ship would arrive at port, the crew would prepare everything, and then they would wait, sometimes for hours. Equipment wasn't ready, documents weren't ready, trucks weren't ready. Workers were waiting, and the ship was losing money every minute it sat there. Ethan started asking questions. Why did this happen? Why wasn't everything prepared before the ship arrived? An older officer laughed. That's just how ports work. But Ethan didn't accept that answer. He started keeping notes. Every port, every delay, every problem, every unnecessary expense. He noticed patterns. The same problems happened again and again. And Ethan began wondering something. What if someone could solve those problems? He had no business, no degree, no investors. He was still just a deckhand. But he understood something that many people on land didn't. The maritime industry wasn't just about ships. It was about time. A ship sitting in port wasn't earning money. A delayed cargo shipment could cost thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, and sometimes much more. Ethan started researching the industry during his free time. He learned about logistics, port operations, shipping schedules, cargo management. He downloaded spreadsheets and studied them late at night in his small cabin. His coworkers thought he was crazy. "You're here to work, not become a businessman," one sailor told him. Ethan smiled. "Maybe I can do both." Then came the storm. It happened during Ethan's second year at sea. The ship was carrying industrial equipment across the Atlantic. The weather forecast had predicted rough seas, but the storm became much stronger than expected. The waves grew higher. The wind screamed across the deck. Everyone was ordered inside. But during an emergency inspection, Ethan noticed something. One section of cargo wasn't secured properly. If the cargo shifted, it could damage the ship. Ethan immediately reported it. The crew went back outside. They secured the equipment. And hours later, the storm became even worse. The cargo stayed in place. The ship survived. But Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what almost happened. One small problem could have caused millions of dollars in damage. That night, sitting alone in his cabin, Ethan wrote one sentence in his notebook. There has to be a better way. He didn't know it yet, but that sentence would eventually change his life. After 5 years at sea, Ethan had become an experienced sailor. He had traveled across the Atlantic, visited dozens of ports, worked with different crews, and witnessed hundreds of logistical problems. Then one day he decided to leave the sea. His friends thought he was crazy. "You finally got a good position. Why would you quit? You've spent 5 years building your career." Ethan had one answer: "I've spent 5 years learning." He went home with savings, experience, and an idea. His plan was simple: build a company that helped shipping companies reduce the time their vessels spent waiting in port. But there was one problem. Ethan had never run a company before. And when he started calling shipping companies, almost nobody wanted to listen. The first company rejected him. The second never returned his call. The third told him, "You're a sailor, not a logistics consultant." Ethan hung up. He looked at his notebook. 5 years of notes, hundreds of pages, thousands of observations. He knew the problems were real. Now he had to prove that his solution was real too. And that's when Ethan made the riskiest decision of his life. He put almost all of his savings into building his first maritime logistics system. If it failed, he would have almost nothing left. And nobody knew it yet. But his first test was about to go terribly wrong. To be continued. Ethan's first system failed completely. The software crashed during the first trial. The schedules didn't synchronize. The port information was outdated. And the shipping company that had agreed to test it was furious. The manager called Ethan. "This system wasted more time than it saved." Ethan apologized. The trial was over. The company wanted nothing to do with him. Ethan sat in his apartment that night, staring at his laptop. For the first time, he seriously considered giving up. He had spent most of his savings. He had left a stable maritime career, and now his first big idea had failed. But then Ethan remembered something his old captain had once told him. "At sea, you don't panic because the first plan fails. You adjust." Ethan opened his notebook. He went back through everything. The software wasn't the only problem. He had built it based on what he thought companies needed. He hadn't listened enough to the people actually using it. So Ethan changed his strategy. He went back to the ports. He talked to workers, dispatchers, captains, warehouse managers, truck drivers, port operators. He asked one simple question: what wastes the most time? The answers were surprisingly similar. Information was scattered everywhere. One company used email, another used spreadsheets, another used phone calls. Nobody had a clear picture of what was happening. Ethan realized the real problem wasn't the ships. It was communication. So he rebuilt his system. This time, he didn't try to make it complicated. He made it simple. One platform, one dashboard, shipping schedules, cargo information, equipment availability, port updates, everything in one place. His second test went better, much better. The shipping company reported that they had reduced unnecessary waiting time. Then another company became interested. Then another. Within a year, Ethan had several paying customers. He hired 2 former sailors, then a software developer, then a logistics specialist. His tiny company was growing, but the biggest opportunity came unexpectedly. A major shipping company contacted Ethan. They had heard about his system. They wanted a demonstration. Ethan arrived at their office wearing the same simple jacket he'd worn to dozens of port meetings. Across the table sat executives who managed millions of dollars worth of cargo. One of them asked, "Why should we trust you?" Ethan didn't give them a complicated presentation. He simply said, "Because I've been on the deck waiting for the truck that never arrived." The room went silent. He continued, "I've watched ships sit in port because information was missing. I've watched crews wait because someone on shore didn't know what was happening. I know what the problem feels like because I lived it." That answer changed the meeting. They agreed to test his system. The contract was worth more money than Ethan had ever seen in his life. His small company suddenly became a serious business. Within 3 years, Ethan's maritime technology company was working with shipping companies in multiple ports. His team grew, his revenue grew, and eventually, the company passed $1 million in annual revenue. But Ethan never forgot the ocean. Every year, he went back to sea. Not because he needed the money, because he wanted to remember where everything started. One evening, Ethan stood on the deck of a cargo ship watching the sunset. A young deckhand was working nearby. The young man looked exhausted. Ethan recognized the expression immediately. It was the same expression he had worn years earlier. "You knew?" Ethan asked. "Yeah." "How long?" "3 months." Ethan smiled. "Give it time." The young sailor looked at him. "Do you still work on ships?" Ethan laughed. "Sometimes." The young man noticed Ethan's expensive watch. "You're a captain?" "No." "Engineer?" "No." "Then what do you do?" Ethan looked toward the horizon. "I started a company." The young sailor smiled. "Doing what?" Ethan pointed toward the port. "Trying to make sure ships don't waste time sitting there." The young sailor laughed. "That's a weird business." Ethan smiled. "It started with a weird observation." He walked away. Years earlier, Ethan had been just another young deckhand. He had no degree, no connections, no wealthy family, no business experience. But he had something that turned out to be more valuable. He paid attention. He noticed problems other people had accepted as normal, and instead of saying, "That's just how things work," he asked, "Why does it have to work this way?" That question changed his life. Ethan eventually built a company worth millions. But the money wasn't what made him successful. The real advantage came from his years at sea. Every difficult shift taught him something. Every delayed shipment taught him something. Every storm taught him something. Every mistake taught him something. And every rejection forced him to become better. Ethan's story proves that sometimes the job you think is only a way to make money can secretly be your education. You don't always need a fancy office to find $1 million idea. Sometimes you just need to look closely at the problems around you. Because the biggest opportunities aren't always obvious. Sometimes they're hidden inside the ordinary, inside the long hours, inside the boring routines, inside the jobs nobody dreams about. Ethan started as a deckhand carrying ropes across a freezing ship at 2 a.m. Years later, he was running a multi-million-dollar maritime business. He didn't escape his past. He used it. And that's what made all the difference. Because while everyone else saw a sailor working on a ship, Ethan saw an entire industry full of problems waiting to be solved.